Walter White was a real person? His fate was set up in the first episode of the show? Do Breaking Bad's episode titles foreshadow one of its biggest moments? Breaking Bad is full of references, Easter eggs, and details you might have missed. With the release of the sequel film El Camino on the horizon, we're taking a look at 25 of the very best. Breaking Bad has what's widely considered to be an iconic opening. Walter White, who would go on to build an empire as the criminal mastermind Heisenberg, walks in a pantsless panic through the desert. Everyone remembers this scene, but have you ever wondered what happened to those pants? No? Well, the Season 5 episode Ozymandias answers that question anyway. As Walter pushes a barrel through the desert, he passes a pair of filthy, ancient pants lying in the sand. It's a great Easter egg and a reminder of how far he's come. Speaking of iconic, Gustavo Fring is one of TV's great villains, and his demise remains one of the most memorable moments of the entire show. After being blown up by his old rival Hector Salamancar, Gus calmly walks away, only to reveal that he's missing half of his head. This moment is actually foreshadowed, though it's actually tucked into another piece of foreshadowing. Before the plane collision over Walter's house, we see ghastly images of fallen debris, including a bear with half of its face missing, just like Gus. That's twice the foreshadowing at half the price.
You're goddamn right.
Walter White's arc over the course of Breaking Bad is legendary. Watching a regular guy become a vicious drug kingpin is fascinating, but it's also kinda sad. Over 5 seasons, you see a nice family guy turn into a dark and terrifying figure. This change in Walt's morality is mirrored in his wardrobe as Walt wears darker and darker tones throughout the series. The show also famously had colors closely associated with different characters, like Marie with purple, and associated certain colors with certain themes, like pink and death. The next one is a small one, but we think it's worth mentioning. Walter Jr., Walt's son, isn't seen a lot on the show, especially in later seasons. When he is seen, he's usually at breakfast, and much of his personality has to be extrapolated from there.
I want real bacon, not this fake crap.
In an internet-famous scene from the second season, Junior complains to his mother about her buying the wrong cereal. She bought Raisin Bran when he wants Raisin Bran Crunch.
It's not that hard, Mom. It says crunch on the box.
3 seasons later, Raisin Bran Crunch is seen on the breakfast table. Junior's patience finally paid off. Like many of the entries on this list, this observation can be traced back to Dorkly writer Tristan Cooper, who is truly an eagle-eyed viewer. Saul Goodman is a fan-favorite character from Breaking Bad.
Dr. Phil, my daddy's a drug dealer, and my mommy turned him in.
And turned out to have enough depth to carry his own show, the excellent and underrated Better Call Saul. His show is named for the slogan of Saul's legal practice, which begins to represent Walt and Jesse in the second season. But before Saul ever appears on screen, his arrival is hinted at when Jesse's friend Badger has a discussion with a friend on a bench. Behind them, unnoticeable at the time, is Saul's image. Speaking of background details in the set decoration, a more subtle Easter egg actually appears on the floor of the hospital set seen throughout the show. If you look at the tiles of the floor on the hospital, you can make out a familiar pattern. The green tiles mimic the tiles from the opening of the show, with 2 diagonal green panels and 2 clear ones. It's amazing to think that this level of detail went into every level of production. Jane's demise is one of the most tragic moments on the entire show. Even if you believe that Jane would prevent Jesse from beating his addiction as Walt did, she did not deserve to choke on her own vomit. But Jane's shocking death may seem less shocking if you watch the show a second time. It was heavily foreshadowed multiple times throughout the second season. First, when Jane turns Jesse on his side to prevent him from vomiting, then it's referenced in a flashback when she jokes about vomiting her mouth a little bit. Dark stuff. But Jane's demise wasn't the only thing that was foreshadowed. Walt's part in it is also set up. Early in the season, Skyler is seen turning her baby daughter Holly on her side to prevent the fate that befalls Jane later on. Not only does this foreshadow Walt's complicity in what happens to Jane, but it brings up an interesting contrast between Walt and Skyler. Walt's unwillingness to save Jane is like an extension of his bad parenting, while Skyler actually cares about the well-being of her family. Closer to the end of the series, Jesse Pinkman was haunted by the hit Walt ordered him to carry out and the memory of his victim, Gale. Gale, the cheerful chemist who never really bothered anybody, remains on Jesse's mind long before his demise, and twice the series reminds us of him. First, when Jesse is playing a video game, Gale can clearly be seen written backwards on a wall. Later still, the sign for Lydia's company Madrigal appears to spell another backwards Gale. Gale lives on. Shine on, you crazy diamond. One of the first times we realized the true ruthlessness of Gustavo Fring is in the series of flashbacks set in Mexico. In one of his most famous moments, Gus poisons an entire party of cartel members using a bottle of bad tequila. This plan is actually set up much earlier in the show. During Gustavo and Don Eladio's first meeting, Gus clearly notes Eladio's affinity for tequila and supposedly reasons that he might be blinded by the offer of a great bottle. He was right. Despite his name appearing in every episode of the show, Vince Gilligan is not a very public figure. Staying off social media and rarely weighing in on much beyond the show itself, even the biggest Breaking Bad fan could be forgiven for not knowing what Gilligan looks like. Unfortunately, this next Easter egg requires that you do. In a scene from the final season, Gilligan's face can be seen gracing Breaking Bad's money in place of Andrew Jackson. Does this mean Gilligan was one of America's first presidents in the Breakingverse? Yes, it does. That is now canon. This next one is for you big chemistry fans out there. From its opening sequence to many of its plot details, Breaking Bad often pulls cuts from deep in the periodic table. But this next Easter egg may be its most obscure reference ever. Breaking Bad ran for 62 episodes, and this isn't an arbitrary number. The 60-second element on the periodic table is Samarium, an element often used in chemotherapy to treat cancer. Could this be a coincidence? Definitely. But it's more interesting to imagine Gilligan and his team planning the entire arc of the show around a dumb chemistry joke. Moving on, we wanted to highlight a not-so-subtle piece of foreshadowing in Season 5. In this scene, Walt checks out a bullet hole in the side of a car. The shot lines up the hole with the reflection of Walt's head, symbolizing that he will not make it out of this series alive. It seems obvious in retrospect, but it's easy to miss these details when you're wrapped up in the story of the show. Even one that's about as subtle as a bullet to the head. At least it's easier to watch than Jane's vomit jokes. Here's an interesting homage that plays into the show's obsession with color. In this scene from the 4th season, Jesse pulls a gun on Walt and they end up in a familiar position. The characters are posed almost identical to a scene from Reservoir Dogs, a tense standoff between Harvey Keitel and Steve Buscemi. But there's more to it than that. The characters in Reservoir Dogs are named Mr. White and Mr. Pink, which is pretty darn close to Mr. White and Mr. Pink Mint. It's a nice nod to a classic crime film. As you may already be able to tell, Breaking Bad really outdid itself with its Easter eggs in the final season. This reached ahead with Ozymandias, a dramatic, chaotic episode filled with Easter eggs, references, and interesting moments. One such moment comes after Walt kidnaps his own daughter, Holly. In the scene, Holly calls out for her mother, causing Walt to realize that he has to return her. Amazingly, this line was not scripted, and during a take, the baby playing Holly called out for her real mother. Nice ad-lib, baby! Soon after, Walt leaves Holly in a fire station, knowing she'll be returned to Skyler. But there's something else interesting happening in the background. If you look closely, you can see a chessboard, which presumably was being played by the firefighters. On the board, the black pieces have surrounded the White King. This symbolizes that Walter White, a White Kingpin, is about to lose his empire. Surrounded by enemies with nowhere to run, this background detail lets us know that we are watching Walt's final stand. Another neat piece of symbolism occurs at the beginning of Ozymandias with the loss of Hank Schrader. If you recall, Hank is shot and falls into a hole in the desert, never to be seen again. What you may not recall is that Walter dug that hole himself when he was attempting to hide his barrels full of cash. Symbolically, Walt is responsible for Hank's fate, and he literally dug his grave. This moment when Walt is first directly confronted with what he's done. Continuing on to the final episode, we have this shot of a New Hampshire license plate. It's hard to come up with a more boring sentence than New Hampshire license plate, but with this close-up, the show implies a connection between the slogan and the fate of its main characters. The slogan and the two options it presents can easily be taken to connect the journeys of Walt and Jesse. Jesse, controlled by Walt, and then Todd, is finally allowed to take the first option while Walt takes the latter. We're all familiar with the dreaded double entendre, but the title of the final episode of Breaking Bad, Felina, tries the ever-ambitious triple entendre. The most literal meaning comes from the song El Paso, a song Walt listens to in the final episode. The song is about a wanted man who comes back to town to find the woman he loves, much like the hunted Walter returns to New Mexico to fix his affairs. The second meaning is that Felina is an anagram for finale, symbolizing the end of the show. The third is a bit complicated. When you break up the title into Felina, the elements of the periodic table it refers to translate loosely into blood, meth, and tears. Well played, Breaking Bad writers. Breaking Bad was not done dropping Easter eggs even as the credits of the final episode rolled. The song Baby Blue plays during Walter's final moments, and its lyrics cleverly allude to the story.
Special love I had for you.
The song is originally about a man who pines for his lost love, but in the context of the series, the lyrics sound like an ode to Walter's blue meth. Guess I got what I deserved. Kept you waiting there too long, my love. All that time without a word. Didn't know you'd think I'd forget or I'd regret the special love I have for you, my baby blue. Another interesting thematic parallel occurs in the very last shot of the show. It's a shot from above as Walter is splayed out on the ground. The shot is the end of Heisenberg's journey as he has closed the books on his empire and tried his best to tie up loose ends. But the shot echoes another famous shot when Walt finds his basement crawlspace empty and begins laughing maniacally. Thematically, that was the end of Walter White when Walt truly became Heisenberg. The final shot of the series shows Heisenberg's journey is done too. Here is a really cool one. Everyone remembers the pink bear with the missing face. Famously, the bear appeared in a series of cryptic flash-forwards that heavily foreshadowed a major Breaking Bad event, the collision of two passenger planes that was indirectly Walt's fault. But if you take the titles of the episodes in which these flashbacks occur, the foreshadowing becomes even more obvious and ominous. The titles, when combined, read 737 down over ABQ, as in a 737 plane down over Albuquerque. How did we miss that? Speaking of the plane crash, here's where things get weird. The plane crash on the show closely resembles a 1986 incident known as the Cerritos mid-air collision. In the incident, two planes clipped each other, causing one to go down and crash into a nearby suburb. Fault was found partially with the way air traffic controllers handled the situation, and the air traffic controller who handled the accident was named, and this is 100% true, Walter White. It is a truly bizarre coincidence, but it's unexplainable any other way. So weird. Moving on, this next one is more complex and creepy. Throughout the show, a pattern emerges with Walt's behavior in regards to the victims of his violence. Over the course of the show, Walt takes traits and habits from the people he hurts. Specifically, Crazy 8, the drug dealer who Walt imprisons with a bike lock, eats his sandwiches with the crusts off. Later, Walt is seen doing the same thing. Later still, Walt steals Mike Ehrmantraut's drink order after Mike passes away, switching to ordering his whiskey with ice. Finally, Walt copies the way Gus vomits, placing a towel under his knees before he does so. Creepy. Finally, one of the best Easter eggs of all comes from the very first episode. In the pilot, Walt is told by his doctor that he only has 2 years to live. Despite Walter eventually beating cancer, this diagnosis turns out to be very accurate. Walt is given his original diagnosis on his birthday, then almost exactly 2 years later, a day after his birthday, Heisenberg breathes his last breaths. Smart doctor, even though he didn't say you will live for 2 years before being shot by a robot gun you built to fight neo-Nazis. That would have been more informative. So, what did you think of our list? Any Easter eggs we missed? Are you excited for El Camino? And what's your favorite Badger moment? Subscribe to Screen Rant for more great Badger content.